attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Freefall. Hi everyone, I'm Andy Steele, and here we are again with another show, getting the word out week after week that the War of Terror is based on a lie, and that thousands of lives were snuffed out in the World Trade Center towers, not because of building failures caused by airplane impacts and fires, but because of explosive controlled demolition. That somebody somewhere made the decision to bring those buildings down with all those people inside, and that this wasn't some natural reaction of the buildings to the initial strike like you were told by the flickery blue box. Alright, that you're being lied to by the National Institute of Standards and Technology and by the corporate media, and because of this you need to do the research and speak out like so many others have done. Now, if you're tuning into the show for the first time, then let us introduce ourselves. We are 9/11 Freefall, and we talk about 9/11 science. Alright, real 9/11 science, not political agenda science like the government puts out with computer models that would only be accurate on another planet in another universe, but actual science based on the scientific method and the laws of physics in effect here on planet Earth. Alright, we talk about what people are doing to get the truth out to the sleepy public, and to an establishment composed of individuals who are fearfully guarding this official lie to protect their agencies, or their careers, or their lives, and to protect their fabricated identities. Alright, what do I mean by that? I mean identities as people living in a country in which members of the government can do no wrong, and would certainly not be complicit in covering up an issue as important as this one. Alright, now indeed there's a lot of weak people out there, and their egos are as fragile as the wings of a fly, and they're still chanting these tired old zombie mantras of the post-9/11 world, you know, pretending that it's sensical, that supporting the troops equates to needlessly sending them into harm's way to die, you know, far from home, or that dismantling the Constitution constitutes defending it. Or, and this is the big one, that it makes sense for a 47-story high-rise like Building 7 to fall in controlled demolition style because of random office fires. Alright, this is all because those are the pre-approved ideas of the masters who mold public opinion for their own aims. Now the good news, and there is good news, is that there are people out there with stiff spines, and they are empowering more and more members of the public with the tools that they need to get the word out there and expose the real crime of the century. Alright, now one of those groups, of course, is architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Alright, AE 9/11 Truth is a non-profit organization started by Richard Gage, AIA, getting the word and leading the charge in a movement that is rightly called 9/11 Truth. You can check out AE 9/11 Truth's webpage at ae911truth.org, and you can sign the petition they have there. Either you're an architect or an engineer and you want to add your name to the currently over 1,700 others in your field demanding a real investigation into what brought down the World Trade Center towers, Twin Towers, and Building 7, or you're one of the tens of thousands of other supporters like myself demanding the same exact thing. Alright, you want to be involved in history and with people not just telling the truth but doing something about it, then you need to volunteer with AE 9/11 Truth and team up with individuals that will back you up. Alright, I've said it before and I'll say it again. All of you out there, all you people listening to me right now, alright, you were born with certain talent or a set of talents for a specific reason. Alright, it's not just to make money or have strangers flatter you and tell you how brilliant you are, but to better your world, alright, to clear a path for the next generation of those in our species to pick up the torch and enjoy a better existence than our own right now. Alright, that's just the truth. And a huge part of that is getting this lie off the shoulders of America and ending this nightmare known as the post-9/11 world. So, we're going to go over some quick news before we get to our guest for this week. If you go to George Washington's blog, and that web address for that, it's washingtonsblog.com, spelled just like it sounds. On December 1st, the author there published an article titled "Seismic Evidence Implies Controlled Demolition on 9/11." And this article begins, it says, André Rousseau is a doctor of geophysics and geology, a former researcher in the French National Center of Scientific Research, who has published 50 papers on the relationships between the characteristics of progressive mechanical waves and geology. Dr. Rousseau is an expert on measurement of acoustic waves. Rousseau says that the seismic waves measured on September 11th proves that the 3 buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. Now, the author at Washington's blog links directly to Rousseau's paper, and the title of the paper is well, I'll have the title for you in a moment, but the paper itself is at the Journal of 9/11 Studies. All right, the title is "Were Explosives the Source of the Seismic Signals Emitted from New York on September 11th, 2001. It's kind of a long title, so I will repeat it. Were explosives the source of the seismic signals emitted from New York on September 11th, 2001? All right, so you can Google that if you want to read it. Better yet, why don't I just throw a link to that paper on 911freefall.com for you to read it from there, so you can do that. But it's 23 pages long and has some geophysics jargon in it. That doesn't mean you can't understand it if you read it, but it's not something you're going to want to casually read while you're cooking dinner or something. I obviously can't go over the whole paper right now, but maybe we can locate Dr. Rousseau and get him on here to lay it out for us in the future. I'm just going to read an excerpt from the conclusion. This is directly from the paper. It says, near the times of the plane's impact into the Twin Towers and during their collapses, as well as during the collapse of World Trade Center 7, seismic waves were generated. To the degree that 1, seismic waves are created only by brief impulses, and 2, low frequencies are associated with energy of a magnitude that is comparable to a seismic event, the waves recorded at Palisades and analyzed by LDEO, and that's the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, which published the seismic signals from the World Trade Center on 9/11, undeniably have an explosive origin. Even if the plane's impact and the fall of the debris from the towers onto the ground could have generated seismic waves, their magnitude would have been insufficient to be recorded 34 km away and should have been very similar in the 2 cases to one another. As we have shown, they were not. The types and magnitudes of the seismic signals show significant differences. The greatest differences occur in the propagation speeds, even though their paths were essentially identical under identical conditions. This difference is physically unexplained in the interpretations of the events offered by the LDEO researchers and the 9/11 Commission and NIST. Therefore, we must question their calculations of wave propagation speeds based on their assumption that the wave origins are shown on the video images of impacts and collapses. We can only conclude that the wave sources were independently detonated explosives at other times, thus accounting for the variable discrepancies for each wave origin in relation to the videos. So go to 911freefall.com and we'll have the link up there for you to read that. And keep tuning into the show because, like I said, we'll see if we can hunt Dr. Rousseau down and get him on here to go over this paper for you. So we'll be working on that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take about 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families who are going to be facing yet another Christmas this year without their loved ones at their dinner table. Not only them, but we remember the soldiers and the other victims of the wars that followed 9/11 too. So we're going to take those 10 seconds right now. Okay, folks, of course, we always remind our audience at this time how this movement is about justice and truth and restoring America to being what it always claims to be. We got the power to do this, but, we got to have the collective will to do so. We can talk about strategy and big outreach projects all we want, but in the end, the most effective and easy way to get this information out there is to talk to others. Well, one thing I thought about for this Christmas season is to reach out to bell ringers. If you got some money to give to charity, you get some 9/11 Truth DVDs and you just offer to give to the Salvation Army Red Kettle people outside of stores, and you tell them that you'll donate if they take a DVD. Or if you don't have DVDs, print out one of the evidence sheets from AE 9/11 Truth's evidence page, and that web address to get that at is ae911truth.org/evidence, and you hand that to them. All right, the kind of people taking time out of their lives raising money for the poor at this time of the year are the kind of people you want to be reaching out to and awakening. Another idea that's even simpler, print or write on a little piece of paper the words Google WTC7 or Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and you wrap $1 around it and drop that in the kettle. So, whoever counts the money at the end of the day will find that, and, who knows, maybe it's the person that you need to be awakening. It's just a thought. Now, I don't have a question of the week plan, so what I'm going to ask for instead is ideas, and suggestions. What ways have you thought of to reach out to the public with AE 9/11 Truth's information? You can either call us at 315-982-6663 with your answer, or you can write us at freefall911truth at gmail.com. We're going to be using that as our temporary email for now. So again, outreach ideas, that's what we want. Send them in to us, all right? Call them in at 315-982-6663 or write to us at freefall911truth at gmail.com. We want to hear from you. All right, our guest for the week is Mark Graham. Mark has led a very unconventional life, devoting a ton of time to different political campaigns, including 9/11 Truth, education funding, and air quality issues. He's been a political activist since the 90s. He graduated from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, with a degree in political science, and he co-founded Davis 9/11 Truth in the fall of 2006 with his friend Hank Yorger of Davis. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This group brought Professor David Ray Griffin and Professor Stephen Jones to the UC Davis campus to do presentations on 9/11. For 2 years and 9 months, he was the volunteer team leader for AE 9/11 Truth. And Mark Graham's also the man I talked about last week. He sent a letter to the insurance companies covering the airlines that Larry Silverstein, who was the guy that owned the World Trade Center buildings that were destroyed on 9/11, sued, claiming that their negligence in letting the planes get hijacked and flown into the Twin Towers caused the destruction of his buildings. Mark's letter pointed out otherwise, so we'll be talking about that and the Silverstein case on the show. Mark Graham, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me on your show here.
Now, all right, Mark, before we get into Larry Silverstein and the airlines, tell us a little more about yourself, and specifically, how did you awaken and get into 9/11 Truth activism?
Well, good question. The day that it happened, I remember thinking to myself, there must have been a bomb in those towers, in one of those towers. And I was talking to family, and one of my family members who knew just about as much about it as I had, because it was the same day, said, oh, no, there wasn't a bomb. Well, anyway, and despite my generally considering myself a well-informed person, I never really went out of my way to research it until one night in June of 2006. I was watching videos on a website called Meta Cafe, just random videos, and I came across Loose Change. Now, back at the time, I think it was still the first edition, I don't know, it might have been the second edition of Loose Change, and I watched, it was in 3 parts. I couldn't find part 1, but I watched parts 2 and part 3, and I thought, wow, no kidding. It seemed like there were an awful lot of holes in the official story. And you know the way 9/11 Truth research is, as soon as you look into one website or a video, it leads you to 2 more or 5 more, and that one leads you to several more, and it leads to more books and articles and everything. So it's an enormously complicated subject, what happened on 9/11. 9/11 Truth is enormously complicated. And anyway, so I spent months there, starting right then, just reading everything I could get my hands on. I read the first 2 books by David Ray Griffin, which were The New Pearl Harbor, Disturbing Questions about 9/11 and the Bush Administration, and in his second book, which is called The 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions. If you've never read anything by Professor Griffin, he is absolutely a genius. I consider him the intellectual leader of the 9/11 Truth movement, and he does such meticulous research, and he has such a nice way of presenting the official story side by side with the facts that basically contradict it and disprove it, so that so you can evaluate it for yourself. I also read a couple of books by Terry Mason. One of them was called Pentagate, and the other one was called, I can't remember the name right now, but his 2 books, which were also very good. So, I don't know, I was off and running from there.
So you decided to do something about it and not just complain, but to actually go out and do whatever you can. That's great, and there's a lot more people doing that now because of people like you who laid the foundation. Now, okay, so give us some background, because there might be members of the audience who may not even, surprisingly may not even know about this issue, and who may not know who Larry Silverstein is or about the lawsuit we're going to be talking about. So, set the stage, tell us the story about this.
Okay. I'll start even a little bit farther back. How I often start to tell people about 9/11 is this. I say the Bush administration, before they even took over the White House, and notice I didn't say before they got elected, Bush and Cheney and his gang wanted to start a war with Iraq. This is a fairly easy thing for people to believe, considering that they did start a war with Iraq. And as my explanation goes, they knew that the American people would not just go for a war with Iraq just because they wanted to invade Iraq. They could only do it if there was some quote-unquote reason for it. In other words, if there was some emotional trigger, or if it appeared that we were under threat of being attacked by Iraq. Well, so now there was a document that called Rebuilding America's Defenses that was written a year prior to 9/11 by something called the Project for a New American Century. You can still find this document and their website online. And that was like a conservative think tank that included Paul Wolfowitz, Dick Cheney, and a lot of people that became key players in the Bush administration. Anyway, they were talking about a major military expansion into Asia, huge military budget increases, and what they said about selling this idea, this invading Asia and to the American people was this. The process of transformation, they're talking about transformation of public opinion of the American voter, is likely to be slow in the absence of a catastrophic and catalyzing event such as a new Pearl Harbor. That was their quote. Now, back to the Bush administration, Dick and Cheney, 9/11 was that catastrophic and catalyzing event. It instantly changed the sentiment in the United States from, oh, come on, don't bother me with Iraq, we already beat them in a Gulf War, and it's not a current issue, to the American population being rightfully angry, afraid, shocked, and in a very emotional state. And in that position, the population and the Congress were very pliable and very easily led into war. So that's the reason we had the 9/11 attacks. It was a pretext for invading Iraq.
Absolutely. Now tell the public who Larry Silverstein was and about the lawsuits that you've gotten involved in now.
Right. Larry Silverstein is a New York real estate developer. 6 weeks prior to the 9/11 attacks, he signed a lease from the New York, New Jersey Port Authority for the Twin Towers, a 99-year lease. And he was also the owner of Building 7, which was another part of the World Trade Center complex. So he is really a key player in the whole 9/11 story. In an interview 1 year after 9/11, he made a quote which sounds an awful lot like an admission that there was a plan to demolish Building 7. And the quote, you can find it online, you can find it on YouTube videos or other videos, and it was something like this. I got a call from the fire department commander, and they said that they were not likely to be able to put out the fires. And he says, I told them, we've had such a terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made the decision to pull, and we watched the building come down. End of quotation. That's not exactly verbatim, but it's darn close. Anyway, so he's had a difficult time trying to explain why that wasn't a description of controlled demolition. Anyway, Larry Silverstein sued. Well, he's just been in the courts ever since 9/11 happened. He went after his own insurance companies and recovered, I think it was $4 billion from them, because, of course, he had insurance on his buildings. And his insurance policies specifically covered acts of terrorism, and they said he was going to be able to recover so much money per occurrence. Well, he was able to convince the courts that each of the planes, one that hit the North Tower and one that hit the South Tower, was a separate occurrence. So that's how he got so much money out of his insurance companies. In 2004, he filed lawsuits against American Airlines, United Airlines, and some other companies that provided security screening at the airports, such as Globe Aviation Services and Huntley. And his essential argument was this. The airline, let's call them the airline defendants, because it's not just American and United Airlines, although they are the key players. He said the airline defendants were negligent in allowing the hijackers to board the planes and hijack the planes and fly the planes into the Twin Towers. He also said that as a direct result of those plane crashes into the Twin Towers, both the Twin Towers were completely destroyed and Building 7 was completely destroyed. And he's trying to recover from the airline defendants $8.4 billion to compensate him. So it's not only property damage, but it's lost business revenue, lost profits that he would have had, if he had still been collecting rent all these years from the Twin Towers. Those lawsuits were filed in 2004. They are still going in the United States District Court in the Southern District of New York today.
Wow. Yeah, and, we talked about that last week on the show, but now you've sent a letter. You've put yourself into this lawsuit, and anyone who wants to read the story about it, you can go to 9/11 Blogger, and they got an article there. But tell us about what you're doing and what you did.
Yes. Well, it came about because we had a suggestion from a new volunteer this summer when I was still the volunteer team leader for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. There was a former attorney from Miami who came to us and he said, has AE 9/11 Truth done anything in regards to these lawsuits in New York City? And I said no. And he said, well, you should. He said, in particular, you should take some of this scientific information that AE 9/11 Truth has gathered and put together and present it to the attorneys for the airline defendants so that they can use it in their own defense. And we should also present it, he said, to the insurance companies who had insured the airlines and the other airline defendants, so they can present it, in their defense as well. Or, the insurers often step in when they've got an insurance policy and then there's been a claim. So that is how the idea came to me. AE 9/11 Truth sent a letter in July. It was a one-page letter over Richard Gage's signature to the airline defendants, and none of them responded. The organization never got around to writing to the insurance companies, so about a week and a half ago, I took it upon myself to do that. And so I put together a letter which spelled out in pretty good detail the scientific evidence and mailed it to the insurance companies. And these are some of the biggest insurance companies in the world. And like you mentioned, that is you can find that on 911blogger.com.
And what I love about what you're doing, this is a kind of targeted outreach, because this is different than just talking to some guy in the street or talking to your local grocer about 9/11. And, because, okay, the public's informed and knows that this was controlled demolition. But what I love about what you're doing is you're actually targeting the big players involved in this whole story, and you're doing it in a way that is the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The way that is the most impacting, for lack of a better word, is with their wallets. All right, you're pointing out how they can save money in this lawsuit, about how there is this other evidence out there, and regardless of what the outcome is, that's a brilliant approach, because you're really hitting them where it hurts, and you're really going after the people who will have the resources and the money and the power that if they decide to act on the evidence that you are sending to them, can actually make some waves with it. Mm-hmm. All right? So this is what I love about this. This is where our brains need to be. I'm speaking to the general public right now. This is where our heads need to be. You need to be, Mark's talking directly to the insurance companies, but you need to be thinking about, who else can we be talking to? Maybe we should talk to, instead of talking to journalists, we should be writing to individual or to members of the Associated Press's board, to the top levels, speak to them. With consolidation of power at the very top of a lot of organizations, those are the people that you need to be talking to. So that's just a little message to the audience to learn from Mark Graham's example here. Now, Mark, what's interesting to me about this is the airline defendants have never raised the doubts about the official story and, about the fact that it was impossible to bring down buildings 1, 2, and 7 without explosives, or this, obviously the evidence of controlled demolition. Why do you think, I have my own theories, but why do you think they haven't raised this issue, or do you think it hasn't occurred to them? What's your opinion?
That's a really good question, Andy, and it's certainly a logical question that comes to mind. Why haven't the airline defendants mentioned any of this stuff. Now, I just want to clarify, there are two claims that I put in that letter, and one is that it was not possible for the airplane impacts and the resulting fires to bring down the Twin Towers in Building 7. That's one. Let's not call it a claim. It is a conclusion that is demonstrated by the evidence.
Absolutely.
And the other conclusion is that controlled demolition actually brought down the Twin Towers in Building 7. In case your viewers or listeners are not really familiar with that term, controlled demolition is a process that is used. There's a whole industry for taking down old steel, in this case, steel frame skyscrapers, when you want to build a new one. I mean, you built a building 30 years ago and it's outlived its useful life. You want to do something else. You want to build a taller or newer building on that same location. So what do? Well, you have to get the old one out of the way. So how do you do it? It's a very carefully done thing. There are explosives that are planted along the supporting columns and basically the infrastructure of the building, and they are detonated in a carefully planned sequence so as to make the building come down basically into its own footprint, which is, directly where it stands, and not fall over and not, make an enormous mess and damage nearby buildings. So you can do a web search on controlled demolition. You find, by the way, anytime I refer to finding something online, your viewers probably know this by now, you can find a lot of junk on the internet, a lot of false stuff, because you just can. And you can also find some very interesting, useful, accurate scientific information. So it's up to every person to take what you see and read online with a grain of salt. You should always think for yourself. And you should always question, does this make sense with what I already know? And who is telling me this? Do they maybe have a hidden motive or a financial incentive to tell me something that's not accurate? Or who are they really working for? That sort of thing. All right, so your listeners are smart, independent thinkers anyway. Back to, what was the question, Andy?
Oh, it was about why haven't the insurance companies raised this issue before?
Right, good question. Well, unlike many things in the 9/11 truth movement, this is something that I cannot answer with scientific evidence, so I can speculate. And speculating is not all bad. The key thing is that they haven't raised it, so I'm trying to get them to raise this. But as one of the engineers that I know said a long time ago, the federal government was very altruistic with the airlines in the aftermath of 9/11. And it's possible, we know that 9/11 is not on the up and up. And it's possible, I don't see a reason to say that it couldn't have happened. It's possible that Uncle Sam, in providing money to the airlines and let's say to the airline defendants, slipped them a couple $1 billion extra with the expectation that they would be sued and they would have to pay in a settlement to the Larry Silverstein properties. So Uncle Sam made it possible, didn't bother to tell anybody. The main, so that's one scenario. I mean, the main reason is these are very shocking conclusions, and it's very shocking evidence. And it disrupts what the government and the mainstream media want the American public to believe about 9/11. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Point to them. Identify them. We've been sold a bill of goods which says that the good guys are United States of America and the bad guys are these Arab terrorists, and that there's no overlap or intersection, there's no gray. Well, as soon as you start getting into the scientific facts of those two conclusions I mentioned, the line between good guys and bad guys is not quite so clear anymore, and that is a very shocking thing. So I think that the attorneys want to argue their case within the limits of what is comfortable to the government, comfortable to the mass media, and comfortable to the American public.
I agree with you, and just to interject my own opinion too on this subject. I worked for an insurance company for a few years. It was in dental insurance, but I remember during my training period when they're giving you all the info about the company. I won't say the company name, but they were very proud of the fact that with life insurance, their life insurance policies, there were people in the World Trade Centers that died that day who weren't covered for this specific kind of death. But my company paid out the claims anyway, and they were proud because it was a good thing to be able to announce that we were such a good guys that we put that that we paid it out anyway because 9/11 was such a horrific event, and we stepped up and did the right thing. Now, I look at this, and in terms of like your letter and the controlled demolition evidence, with what the media has done and the job that they've done on the American public to try to demonize people like you and people like me, and portray us as crazy, wacko, nuts that are just coming up with the stuff off the top of our head. With the job that they've done in the public, if I'm thinking from the stance of an insurance executive, I would be thinking, okay, well, what's the media? How is the media going to handle this? How is Larry Silverstein going to handle this in trying to pursue his lawsuit? Well, the talking point that'll be on Fox News is that insurance companies are trying to weasel out of paying their dues for 9/11, and they're embracing 9/11 conspiracy theories to do it. That's going to be the talking point. That's what I imagine would be coming out. And insurance companies, are taking such a big hit with just everything that's going on with the politics and the healthcare and everything like that. They don't want bad publicity, and so that's what I personally think is playing into that, is the publicity that'll come out, and just the fact that this is such a controversial topic that it might be, from their standpoint, better for business to just pay out the money than to open up this can of worms. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah. They want to get back to business as usual. Business as usual is very profitable. Insurance is a very profitable industry. Obviously, this is not a profitable event, and these lawsuits, if they end up paying $8.4 billion to Larry Silverstein and his companies, well, that'll wipe out several years' worth of profits. But like I said, if they were sort of reimbursed already by Uncle Sam, which I consider a distinct possibility, then they don't have to worry about the profit so much. And you're right. They want to be wearing the white hat when the final chapter of these lawsuits is written. The insurance companies want to be wearing the white hat that says, hey, we're with you. God bless America. Go Army, go Navy, go Air Force, Marines. Kill, 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 kill. And we are with you. Because that's the public perception that is popular. So they want to jump on the bandwagon. I mean, they're on the bandwagon. They would just want to stay on it. But you're right. They would be perceived as, getting off the bandwagon, to say the very least, if they were to start talking about the evidence of controlled demolition in the Twin Towers.
Absolutely. Well, we're in the business of trying to get people off that bandwagon because it's heading over a cliff, and more people are starting to see that with other events happening in the world. Now, in our correspondence, you mentioned Judge Alvin Hellerstein, and I'm going to let you tell the story. Talk about his role in all of this and some rulings of his. So go ahead and tell us about Alvin Hellerstein.
Yes. Okay. He is one of the judges in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. He has these cases, and he's had them, I believe, since they were filed in 2004. I can't really. What I would say about Judge Hellerstein in general is that he's allowed the cases to remain alive. He's kept them alive. Now, let me just tell you something about court documents. Any of your listeners can open up what it's called a PACER account. PACER, and it stands for something like Public Access to Court Electronic Records. You go to pacer.org, and what you can do is you can get copies of many court documents, including in these two cases, and the case numbers are on that 9/11 blogger post that I created, and you'll pay about 10 cents a page, but when there's an order and an opinion, those are free. So you can actually see the court documents. Very useful. There was a ruling recently, November 21st, which is very encouraging, I think, from the point of view of what I'm trying to do, and it was this. United Airlines Flight 175 was the one that crashed into the South Tower. Now, when Silverstein filed lawsuits against United and American Airlines, he actually blamed United Airlines, he blamed both of them for the destruction of the Building 7. But if you've ever looked at it on a map, there's the South Tower, then there's the North Tower, and then 300 feet north of the North Tower was Building 7. So United Airlines came to the court and they did a motion for summary judgment in other words, so that they would not be held responsible for the destruction of Building 7. And essentially what they said was, look, our plane hit the South Tower, which was a long way away from Building 7, and whatever happened to the South Tower did not cause the destruction of Building 7. And they also said we did not have a duty to control whatever was happening on the other airlines' flights. Just, United had a duty to control what was happening with the passengers and the people on the United Airlines Flight 175. I hope I haven't muddied things. But anyway, November 21st, and you can find this online, the judge issued a ruling and granted the motion for summary judgment by United Airlines. In other words, agreeing with them that they are not responsible, they should not be legally and financially responsible for the destruction of Building 7.
So why is that significant to the other insurance lawsuit?
Yes, excellent question. It's significant because it operates on the exact same principle that I have argued with the insurance companies, and that is a defendant should not be held responsible for property damage that he did not cause.
Absolutely. Now, what's interesting about this? We're going to talk more about what you're doing with lawsuits and everything, but this is just something I noticed in preparing for today's show, and I kind of got off in this little side path researching, but, is that Larry Silverstein, now he's, been made a career out of suing people ever since this attack happened. Mm-hmm. He sued the airlines over their security. He's included, suing Boeing for not having the cockpit doors secure, suing the Port Authority of Massachusetts, and if you go back in time, like you said earlier, he sued the insurance companies that insured his buildings. They have them counted as separate acts of terrorism instead of one. Mm-hmm. But nowhere in my research have I found, and this includes his thorough Wikipedia bio or any, I've never found in any other news source yet, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've not found any mention of him filing a lawsuit against Minoru Yamasaki. He was the architect that designed the World Trade Center towers, along with Emery Roth and Sons, who were the associate architects, or just against Emery Roth and Sons, and they designed Building 7. And that's even doubly telling to me, because if you want to believe the official story, then the fall of Building 7 would constitute one of the biggest architectural failures in modern history. Right? I mean, think about this. A high-rise completely falling with an acknowledged over 2 seconds of free fall acceleration, not even because a plane hit it, but because of random fires. All right, folks, that's not supposed to happen when you design a building. If it did, no smart person would ever work in a steel-framed high-rise ever again. I mean, Christ, a fire breaks out and the thing will fall down on your head. Now, Mark, can you comment on that? Like, why isn't, first of all, am I accurate in saying that Silverstein has not sued the designers of the buildings? Wouldn't that make more sense to sue them for the failure of these buildings, even more so than the airlines?
As far as I know, he has not sued the architect or the designer. You're probably right about that, and would that make sense? It makes sense to me. Think about when there's an accident, when there's, you get injured by, you buy something in the hardware store, you take it home, I don't know, there's some tool or some drill or some saw, and you get a cut. Well, what do? You file a lawsuit against the manufacturer and you claim that it was a faulty design. It was a poor design. It was inherently dangerous. So you're right. The official story basically says that these buildings, the Twin Towers and Building 7, were inherently vulnerable to fires. And it would follow logically from that he would sue those guys. Now, it may be that the architect is dead. Remember, these things Twin Towers were completed in about 1970, and I believe Building 7 was completed in about 1986. So I don't really know. But, certainly the companies that they worked for are probably still going. I don't know. Silverstein he's spent a lot of time in court, but he hasn't sued everybody that he possibly could.
And I think this is a big deal because, I'm going to research this more, and I may even, if I can find the time, write an article on this and look into it more because, think about this. I mean, that would seem like the most logical, and I'm speaking to the audience right now, that would seem like the most logical thing to do would be to sue the designers of the buildings. But if you want to think about it from the controlled demolition secret point of view, you don't want to open up that can of worms because then the next thing you have the architectural firms defending themselves. They may consider bringing Richard Gage in there to point out how the official story is absolutely impossible. All right, you don't want that can of worms opening and those worms wriggling out for the public to see.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so he's going after the airplanes in the designers of the airplanes for the cockpit door and the security, all these things having absolutely nothing to do with the architecture of the building and especially Building 7. I can't say that enough. That's doubly important because that wasn't even hit by an airplane, people. That building should not have fallen. It was the emergency building where all those offices were. I mean, you want to talk about architectural failure? There you go. That's where your lawsuit should be directed, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I want the public to think about that. Now, Mark, you're filing and I hope I pronounce it correctly, but it's called an Amicus curiae brief with the help of 2 engineers and an architect. Can you tell our audience more about what that is and what it entails?
This, as far as I know, my Latin's not the greatest, but amicus curiae. Amicus as in friend, curiae as in court, translates into friend of the court brief. I'm not filing it, but there are 2 engineers and 1 architect whom I met through AE 911 Truth who are filing it, and I'm kind of coordinating this whole thing. This is an offshoot of the project plan that we developed back in July when I was still the volunteer team leader for AE 911 Truth. And it's another way to get this information in front of the court and in front of the public. Typically, now, friend of the court briefs are much more common in the U.S. Supreme Court. And a lot of times there will be an organization that sees that their interest could be adversely affected by the ruling of the Supreme Court or whatever court it is, depending on what the ruling is. And they may have information that the court has not considered, a new angle that they could present to the court about what would be the implications of making this or that ruling. Or in another example of a use of the friend of the court brief is to bring in technical information that the attorneys either don't know about or simply maybe they do know about it, but they haven't introduced it. Typically, anytime a friend of the court brief will be useful to the court or useful to the parties in resolving a lawsuit, that is a good opportunity to submit a friend of the court brief. It's not supposed to simply repeat the arguments that the plaintiffs or the defendants have made, because those arguments have been made already. All right. Now, a person can file a friend of the court brief or an organization. It is a very limited sort of action in that you do not become part of the lawsuit. You do not become a party to the lawsuit. It's simply you prepare 2 things: the brief, which has the information you want to show the court and show the parties, and a motion that you're asking the court for permission to file the brief. You put those 2 together, file them with the court, and the court will decide to either accept the motion or deny the motion. If it accepts the motion, then voila, here it is. So now this is something to be considered by the parties. It does not give any obligation to the parties or the court to agree with the friend of the court brief, but they can choose to agree with it. And so the person that files the brief is not going to participate in oral argument. They're not going to be deposed. They're not going to have to go travel to New York City to show up in the courtroom as a result of the friend of the court brief. So it's pretty much once you file the brief, you're finished, and it'll go as far as the parties and the court want to take it. So that's the essence of an amicus curiae brief.
Now, I'm curious, so it doesn't obligate anybody to act on it, do anything with it, call anyone in for expert testimony. What happens if they don't? Do you still consider it success in any way, or what's the purpose of doing it if they don't act on it?
Right, good question. And I should also add, I've done some legal research about this. There are rules that cover front of the court briefs in the Supreme Court, and there are rules that cover the front of the court briefs in a federal court of appeals or appellate court. Now, these cases are in a district court, as I've mentioned. There are no rules for filing a front of the court brief in a United States district court, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. You can do it. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to follow the rules that would apply to filing a front of the court brief in a U.S. appellate court. Now, one of those rules has to do with timing, and you're supposed to file this brief, if you do file it, within, I believe it's 7 days of the brief of the party whom you're supporting. This brief is going to support the airline defendants. Considering the cases were filed in 2004, that 7-day period has long since expired. Therefore, one of the things we're going to have to explain in our motion is why here we are in 2012 wanting to file a Amicus curiae brief for lawsuits that were filed in 2004. And part of our explanation is going to be this. The NIST report on Building 7 wasn't published until November 2008. And typically, in the realm of science, it takes some time for other people to study something and maybe publish a rebuttal or publish a critique of it. Furthermore, one of the engineers that I'm working with didn't even know about these Silverstein lawsuits against the airlines until about, it's a couple months ago now when I told him about it. I called him. Therefore, he's got an ironclad defense as to why he didn't file his brief earlier. But anyway, your question was, how will it be, will we consider it a success if the motion is denied? And my answer is yes, because my understanding is that if the motion is denied, it will still become part of the court files. There will be an order from the court that says these two engineers and this architect filed this amicus curiae brief on such and such a date, they wanting to present certain information about how and why the World Trade Center, Twin Towers and Building 7 collapsed. I reviewed the motion and I'm ordering that it's denied. So there will be a written signed order from the court, and that order should become part of the court files along with the motion and the brief itself. The brief will include like a sworn statement from each of these professionals, building professionals. If all that stuff makes it into the court files, even if it's with a court order that says denied, we will consider it a success because it'll be there as a permanent part of the record. And anybody from then on that wants to go look for it will be able to find it, along with all the thousands of pages of documents that Silverstein's companies and the airlines have filed in these lawsuits.
I love that, and it's all it's almost like a graffiti on this facade that they want to put up of the official story. All right, exposes them, and it's there for the historians to study. Later on, if it takes us longer to expose this than we intend, it'll still be there, and it creates a record that people didn't just go along with this. With this lie, it creates a record that that people looked into this evidence and that this was their conclusion. And later on, maybe when people are not as emotionally involved or invested into this event, maybe after the destructive foreign policy of the United States comes home to roost, and people can look at life with a more realistic eye, then they can look at this evidence that was put out and maybe act on it later, and it'll be there on the record. That's what I love about this. Now, Mark, what's the next step? I mean, because I'm not really a lawyer, and I don't know how these things fall. Like, how long will it take for there to be the next action on your efforts? Like, what are you waiting for now as the next step?
Yeah, good question. First, I'll tell you the most recent step. 2 days ago, December 7th, I mailed a letter to the parties in these lawsuits. The parties basically include Larry Silverstein's companies. He had a separate company for each one of his buildings. But the attorneys representing Larry Silverstein, basically, and all the airline defendants, and there were 11 of them. I mailed this certified letter, which it was basically two things. It was three things, really. It was to inform them of our intent. When I say our intent, my name's not going to be on the brief. My name's not going to be on the motion. It's going to be two engineers and one architect that I've been working with. So our intention to file the motion in the brief, the second aspect was it was a request for their consent, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then the third aspect was it was not a super detailed, but sufficiently detailed summary of the evidence that we were going to present, and the two conclusions that I mentioned earlier, which are, again, that it was impossible for the plane crashes and the fires to bring down these buildings, conclusion number one, and that controlled demolition brought down the buildings, conclusion number two. I said that the second aspect of this was asking for the parties' consent. This goes back to the rules. It's Federal Rule of Appellate Procedure number 29, and like I said, we're following this even though it's a district court. We're required to ask for the parties' consent. We don't have to have it. We don't have to have their consent in order to file this. If all of the parties wrote back and they said, oh yeah, you have our consent to file this brief, then I believe that, well, it would certainly be a stronger case for the judge to grant the motion, but I really don't expect that any of the parties are going to give their consent to this, just because they're going along with business as usual, and this would be a shocking sort of conclusions to bring into court. That's the most recent thing. That was just mailed this Friday the 7th. They should all receive it certified mail tomorrow morning, and it will at least get some attorneys thinking. The next step, which is what you've asked about, is I started, 2 months ago, writing a draft of the motion and the brief. I had done some legal research, and that just got put on the back burner because I wanted to get this letter out. So the next step really is to complete the motion and the brief. We've got help from a retired attorney who is also a former volunteer with AE 9/11 Truth. He will review these things, and believe me, he's very sharp, very, very bright. He'll make sure and cut out all the sarcasm and make sure that they're as persuasive and objectively written as possible, and then we'll file them.
Wow, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of people involved in this, a lot of people working really hard. Now, we have an audience, and we encourage activism. I'm trying to rally the folks to, contribute and help out volunteers like you. Get your efforts, pushed forward. What can our audience do to help you out, Mark?
Oh gosh, well, that's a great question. I haven't thought about that. The way it's conceived of right now, well, let's put it this way: if there is an attorney out there that wants to help with writing the motion and the brief, please contact me, and you can contact me through Andy Steele at this radio show. I would love to have some help in preparing the motion and preparing the brief. That would be the most helpful thing. There have been other people that have offered to help. That's really the next step. Oh, well, when we file the motion and the brief, we're going to do a press release. So here's another way that you can help. I have been putting together a list of media sources or media outlets that I believe have the potential to be 9/11 Truth friendly. As we know, the mainstream media is not 9/11 Truth friendly. In fact, they have censored 9/11 Truth pretty much nonstop for 11 years, and they've fed us pro-war propaganda. If you have an idea for a blog, or maybe another radio show like this one, or somebody that's publishing a newsletter or a newspaper or something like that you consider to be 9/11 Truth friendly or potentially 9/11 Truth friendly, I want to know who that is so that our press release can go out to not only the widest possible audience, but the right people who are actually likely to be interested and to help publicize it. That would be a second way that your listeners could help. Those are the first two that come to mind for now.
Okay, and again, folks, he's telling you to contact me if you are somebody out there, such as an attorney or some kind of expert that can help on this process. And just to repeat our contact info, it's 315-982-6663. That easy way to remember. That's 315-WTC 6663. Or you can call, or you can write to us rather at freefall911truth@gmail.com. That's our temporary email address, and we will forward you over to Mark and get you hooked up here. Now, you talk about writing to 9/11 Truth, potential 9/11 Truth friendly outlets. I always advocate writing to the unfriendly outlets as well. Why should they get off the hook just because they've chosen to support the lie? Sometimes I'm all for pulling the fingers out of their ears that they're holding in there and making them hear. So I would advocate reaching out to them too, just because you get it out there. And I say this every week, or almost every week. Write to your local newspaper. They have editorials. Okay, if enough people write about the fact that a guy is doing this, is filing this, to get it on the record, they may print it, especially in small town rural newspapers. Every little bit counts. You never know who you are reaching. You need to speak out, and you need to do whatever you can. With the press release, we'll get. If you send it to me, Mark, I'll put it up on 911freefall.com, and I'll put it on my other websites that I administer. And you copy and you paste it. The 9/11 Truth movement was built through social networking and through blogs with people repeating information and sending it down the chain. This is how it works, but you need to do that, and you can't just dismiss your own efforts as being too small, because you never know who you're reaching out to. That's why we do this show. We're creating a record of what people did, but we're also reaching out to folks, whoever may be listening. You never know. Okay. Now, Mark, anything else you want to, any closing thoughts or closing comments you want to give to our audience just about your situation, your work, or just in general about 9/11 Truth?
Well, I wanted to say I think that's great advice, what you just said. Also, now I have a website that's davis911truth.org. davis911truth.org. When the press release is done, you'll be able to find it there too. I'm also going to write a blog entry on 911blogger.com. Hopefully they'll put it up on the front page, but you'll certainly be able to find it there by a search. And I appreciate your offer, Andy, to put it on your site. That's a great idea.
And we'll keep the audience updated on what you're doing too.
Yeah, super. I just generally, what you said earlier about the delivery of the message to people who are in a position to make a difference, that is super important. And that is why I have such a strong hope for this project in particular. Right? I mean, in a way, I think we're fortunate that these lawsuits are still going on. If they had already been settled and the insurance companies for the airlines had already coughed up their $8.4 billion, we wouldn't have the opportunity to have any input into this stuff. Unless they appealed. But I think we're fortunate in that sense. And there was something you said earlier about having this information out there for posterity. But yes, just to say why it's a good idea, even if this motion is denied, they'll never be able to say later on, well, nobody mentioned controlled demolition, or nobody gave us scientific information that the fire can't destroy a steel skyscraper. They won't be able to say that. They will be there, and for those that are curious, for those investigative reporters out there who want to apply their investigative reporting talents to this topic, all the evidence will be right there. It'll be a story waiting for you to write.
Absolutely, and that is important. And who knows? I mean, who knows how far your efforts will go, Mark. Maybe the irony will be that Larry Silverstein's greed will be his undoing, as is the undoing of lots of people throughout history. Mm-hmm. This might even send this whole house of cards crashing to the ground. Mark, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Again, folks, this is 9/11 Free Fall. You can listen to us every week on No Lies Radio at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen to our archives and keep track of efforts of volunteers just like Mark Graham here at 911freefall.com. Again, that's 911freefall.com. Well, for Bernie Suarez, this is Andy Steele saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week.